And welcome to the College Chaps podcast. On our last episode, we started a new spring series where our guests talk about their favourite sporting memories. And we continue this with a very special guest in this episode. But first, with the Chaps and George, joined by Oliver. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I was very sad to miss the episode with Chuck Dunlap where we started this series. It was, yeah, very exciting, very entertaining, and a great product of your mind, George, to come up with this concept for a spring series. And we've got a great guest
Well,
tonight to continue this theme.
there's an admission of plagiarism coming up in a second. But we should also just make a point about why our other co-host isn't here. Mr. Chinnery is on the eve of back-to-back national championship finals for Essex volleyball. So Alex is up to his eyes in whatever he's doing at this moment in time. So good luck, AC. We hope you do well tomorrow. Uh, on this episode, our guest joins a very exclusive third appearance fraternity. So exclusive is this club that only 6 guests have made 3 or more appearances in 209 episodes so far. I also have an admission to make. It was listening to our guest show when he interviewed a collector of football helmets that the idea for this series came from. So, with that admission out of the way, you know him as one half of the greatest Southern duo since Parton and Rogers. You hear his voice on game day in SEC Nation every Saturday during football season, and if that wasn't enough, he is the author of multiple New York Times best-selling books. So it's awesome to welcome Mr. Ryan McGee. Welcome, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to talk to you guys. Good to talk a little. I feel like college football season just ended like an hour ago. It's yeah, right on the calendar. It was only 2 weeks, but it felt like so much longer than that because there were so many more games. But yeah, I'm recovering now, and so I'm recovering enough that I can talk college football anytime. But now I'm actually rested enough to make sense. So I appreciate you guys having me.
And it was the longest college football season of all time, wasn't it? So it was from SEC media days all the way up to the championship game. It was a long year for you.
Yeah, and I covered NASCAR exclusively. Marty Smith and I both did the first part of my career, and it's the longest season in American professional sports. I mean, even longer than golf. It starts middle of February, really early February, runs all the way until the late November to Thanksgiving. And the my wife said this year was the first time in all the years I've been covering college football that as I was leaving to go to the championship game, I had what she calls my homestead look because the NASCAR finale used to be in Homestead, Florida. And I had that look like, all right, I'm pulling for a good game, but I do not want overtime. I want to go home. I want to sleep. So yeah, it was a long season and they're going to get longer, in the next couple of years, but but it was great. I mean, the season was unbelievable. And so, but yes, I was definitely ready to take a nap once we hit, January 22nd.
And you watch basketball, but you don't participate so much in basketball. Baseball's your, I'm sure we'll come on to that, but baseball's your real thing. So do you get a
Yeah,
bit
I
of
do a
downtime
little
just
bit
now?
of basketball. Yeah, just a little. Like I did a couple wrote a couple stories this year. I worked a little bit on their bracketology show at ESPN. I did the Open, and voiced that, and then I have a feature that'll run next week. But I've not. I was supposed to cover the Final Four in 2020, and then obviously that was canceled. And in the years leading up to 2020, I was doing a lot of basketball. Like particularly, I live in North Carolina, so on Tobacco Road, North Carolina Duke. I was there. The last game I covered, I believe, was the Zion shoe game, when his shoe exploded in the first 30 seconds of the North Carolina Duke basketball game. And I was headed to the SEC tournament when I got the call as I was pulling into the parking deck at the Charlotte, North Carolina airport. I got the call, turn around and go home. They're about to cancel the SEC tournament. And that's a way of saying I used to do a lot more basketball than I do now. So I dabble in it. But it is very nice to fill out my terrible bracket and that's going to fail, and I can just sit and watch and maybe work a little bit, but not a lot.
Well, if we've got time at the end of this podcast, you can explain to me the Tobacco Road scenario because I hear it a lot. I think I know what it is, but we'll talk about that towards the end if we've got any time.
Yeah.
The purpose of this series is to talk about sporting memories and then go on and talk about some of the stuff that's hiding behind you. But let's talk about some of your favourite sporting memories. What jumps out in terms of what really what's your favourite sporting memories that you've accumulated over the years, Ryan?
Well, I'll answer your Tobacco Road question right now because it leans into a lot of what I'm going to talk about during this conversation, because Tobacco Road is what they refer to. It's basically an interstate, Highway 40 in North Carolina, and it connects North Carolina State University, the Wolfpack, Jim Valvano, and the Cardiac Pack back in 1983. Only about 20 minutes down the road is Chapel Hill, home of the Tar Heels, and obviously Michael Jordan and our buddy Brad Daugherty and everyone else. And then just a few minutes up the road from there is Duke University, Duke Blue Devils, David Cutcliffe, all of our friends there. And then about an hour down the road to the west is Wake Forest, the Demon Deacons. And that's Tobacco Road, those four schools. When I was growing up, they called those the Big Four. And they always played each other, and that's where I grew up. And my dad, as you guys know, was not a basketball official. He was a football official in the Atlantic Coast Conference for years and years and years. I grew up a big North Carolina State Wolfpack fan. One of the biggest reasons I ended up at the University of Tennessee is because it reminded me of NC State. But that's Tobacco Road. And I say all that because a lot of what I talk about here is my life growing up on Tobacco Road during the 1980s, the height of ACC and, in my mind, college basketball. And then, my dad being on the field in the fall as an ACC football official. And so my greatest sporting memory as a kid, just as a fan, I was a huge fan of the North Carolina State Wolfpack. And my favorite player was Thurl Bailey. And the first year I really followed the NCAA basketball tournament, I think it was 32 teams then, is when North Carolina State and the Cardiac Pack with Jim Valvano and those guys won, on the last second buzzer beater, slam dunk by Lorenzo Charles to beat Akeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, the Phi Slamma Jamma group out of Houston. And so I say all that to show you something, because at the Rose Bowl 2 years ago, so the semifinal game between Alabama and Michigan, I was talking to our friend Holly Rowe, the great sideline reporter, the great voice of every sport, it feels like, on ESPN, but particularly when I think about women's sports and college football. And I just casually making small talk with Holly. I go, "So what are you up to these days? Like when football's over?" And she goes, "Well, she goes, I work on the Utah Jazz NBA broadcasts." And I go, "Well, do you work with Thurl Bailey?" And she said, "Yes." I go, "He's my all-time favorite basketball player. He wore number 41. So when I was a kid, to this day, when I'm playing in, like, the old man knee brace league at the YMCA, I wear number 41. And she goes, "I had no idea." And I said, "Yeah." So about 3 weeks later, we did Marty McGee on a Saturday morning. I got a text from Holly right when the show was over with, "What are you doing tonight?" And I said, "Nothing." And she said, "You need to get downtown. I live in Charlotte. You need to go to the Hornets game. I'll leave 2 tickets for you and your wife, at the box office." So we went, and she said, "Get there early." And sure enough, I get there early, and I look, and here comes Holly Rowe, and she's got Thurl Bailey with her, who's the color commentator. And so I took some pictures with Thurl, and then he brought a couple of cards of his own and autographed them for me. And I mean, listen, Holly Rowe was already one of my favorite people in the business, but now I'm indebted to her for the rest of the time, because my greatest childhood sports memory was when NC State won the national championship with Jim Valvano and Thurl Bailey, and I got to tell Thurl Bailey that in person. And my wife said she had never seen me act like that. She said, "I've seen you talk to famous people and great coaches and players. You never acted like that." And I go, "I was 12 again, talking to Thurl Bailey." So that was, to me, as a fan, as a kid, like that was the moment for me.
That's an awesome piece of college football, of sporting memorabilia, just right there, and that's only recently just fallen into your possession. You've got, I mean, all manners of things behind you that I can see right now as well. Little Pip helmet there. There's
Yeah,
all sorts in
that's
the background there.
the Pitt
Look at
helmet.
all this stuff.
Yeah, the Pitt helmet is signed by Johnny Majors. Who,
Nice.
Wow.
so Coach Majors was my coach. When I went to Tennessee, I was there for Coach Majors' last 4 years. The last 3 of those years, 2.5 of those years, I worked for the football team on the video crew. The great Link Hudson, who just retired, and Barry Rice, and all these legendary guys that started what we call VFL Films. I worked with those guys when I was in college, and every day at practice, I got to be on the tower shooting practice film or video every day of the offense. And every day, Coach Majors would come up on that tower with his bullhorn and coach from that tower. He'd stand up there with me for an hour and a half every day. And he was larger than life. Like the building was on Johnny Majors Boulevard. When you came into work every day, you passed his retired jersey, and he should have won the Heisman in 1956. Sorry, Paul Horning and Jim Brown, but you come in and you see all this Johnny Majors stuff and a huge portrait of Johnny Majors, and then I go to work and Johnny Majors would be on the tower with me, but he would talk to me every day about what game is your dad officiating this weekend? How'd you do on your math test? Are you still dating that girl from Nashville? I mean, every day. And so when Coach Majors passed away a few years ago, I wrote a column about that because he was my coach. So yeah, and of course Coach Majors won with Tony Dorsett, as coach called him, in 1976, the year before he returned to Tennessee to be the head coach, and coach gave me that helmet. Yeah, I don't have a lot of full size helmets, but I have I got a lot of mini helmets. I got the Tennessee Smoky Gray, which I always loved. Some people didn't. And then back here is the most valuable of them all, boys, which is of course the Duke's Mayo bowl. Yeah, you got. I mean, that's on the other side, Duke's Mayo Classic. So yeah, that's.
Has he got any mayo on it?
Yeah. No, well, it did. It did at some point. Yeah, it did at some point.
You fill it up with mayo, don't you?
Yeah. You dip stuff in it.
Is that Tennessee helmet? Is that there's a shadow on it? Is that the Rocky Mountains that's on?
Yeah, that's the Smoky Mountains. So they call that
awesome.
Smoky Gray, right? They call that Smoky Gray, and then we'll turn this ring light off. They call that Smoky Gray, and because that's the outline of the Smoky Mountains.
Oh, nice.
So these are the uniforms. This is the first time. It's got the checkerboard on the back. This was the first time when they rolled these helmets out that they wore those smoky gray uniforms that were very divisive at the time. And they didn't win, I think, the first couple of games they wore them, but I think they're the coolest. And that was when alternate uniforms were still like new, particularly in the southeastern corner of the United States. I mean, it was Oregon and pretty much no one else was messing with it. But I always thought, I still think those smoky gray uniforms are just the best.
They're a work of art. Feels like every time you come on the show, Ryan, you show us something amazing, something cool. What is ultimately your most favorite prize possession piece of memorabilia that you own, if you can nail it down to one such a thing?
Yeah, so I kind of have two collections of things, which is, I have the stuff that I've collected over the years from events that I've covered. Like back here, like I've got this chunk of, it looks like nothing, but I've got this chunk of grass, and that's Rose Bowl turf right there. So that's from that same semifinal game 2 years ago. So it was the Michigan-Alabama game, and for SEC Nation and Marty McGee, they wanted someone to ride on we had a float in the parade, the Rose Parade. That was the ABC college football playoff, ESPN float. And I'm like, yeah, I'll ride on it. And I rode the whole 4 hours. And it was very emotional for me because my dad officiated that game twice. And I've got a little souvenir football up there. I think you guys can see from that. But my dad officiated the Rose Bowl twice. And one of those, this was 2007, Michigan, USC. Michigan, I think as I'm speaking, they still gave up 3 touchdowns in that game. It's like the game just kind of rolled. But my dad worked the Arizona State Jake Plummer versus Ohio State game in 96, I believe it was. And I sat in the grandstand there on Colorado Avenue with my mom and my brother. And my mom's entire life, little girl from North Carolina, dreamed of attending the Rose Parade. So we sat there watching the Rose Parade with my mom. It was one of the greatest days ever. My mom died just a couple years later. So for me to go ride in that Rose Parade float for 4 hours, I was with like a Broadway star and a guy from The Bachelor and a country singer, and we had a great time. But it was very emotional for me. And then when the ride was over with, when you make a Rose Parade float, it has to be natural materials. It has to be rose petals, it has to be seeds, it has to be dirt. And they go, well, you know, that turf that you're sitting on there, that's actual, like that turf came from the stadium. And so when no one was looking, I just ripped a corner of it off and stuck it in that bag, and it's kind of dried up. But I say that so I collect things as I'm covering things, and then I collect the things that I collected as a fan, or if I was there with my dad. And so I'll give you some more dirt. I have a lot of dirt in my office. This is from, I don't know if you can see it. This is in this vial, and you can kind of see this gold right there. This
Yeah, I
is
see it.
from the Miracle at South Bend in 1991. There's gold turf right there. Tennessee was getting smoked by Notre Dame in 1991. It's 31-7, I think the score was. And my college roommate, David Montgomery, Super Dave Montgomery, who I talk about on Marty McGee some, Dave and I went to the game, had no money. We sat in a little wooden grandstand actually in the end zone down on the field. Like the wall was behind us in the end zone. And Tennessee came back, uh, took the lead late. Notre Dame had a chance to win the game with the late short, chip shot field goal. And a guy named Floyd Miley, defensive player for Tennessee, blocked that kick with his butt. Floyd Miley and Jeremy Lincoln were the guys that got in there. And we as soon as the game ended, we rushed the field. Only time I ever rushed the field in my life. We rushed the field at Notre Dame, and it was 150th anniversary of the school. So instead of their normal like slash end zones that they have, they had painted this thing of the Golden Dome, and it said 150 years. And I went and ran over there and scooped up a big chunk of gold turf. And so this been in this vial since 1991. Yeah, so I kind of have two collections, boys. I have my stuff I collected as a fan or with my dad, and then I have the stuff that I've collected professionally. Like I have every credential I've ever had. Like I don't ever throw any of them away, much to my wife's chagrin. Um, it's like the Tribbles in Star Trek. They've completely taken over the house, the credentials have.
And I find I clearly collect a lot of stuff as well, right? But as I've gone through the years, maybe as I get older, it's the stuff that has a story behind it and a meaning behind it. And you've talked about, you talked about the Rose Bowl and how much it meant to you. What's a piece of memorabilia that perhaps means the most to you, Ryan? What's the one that kind of jumps out and sticks out that, if you had to hold on to one piece of memorabilia, this would be it? That's a
All right,
difficult
so
question.
I took this down from this actually hangs my office. I always, with the sitcom, everybody loves Raymond. Um, and I always say I'm Ray Barone. It was a sports writer who worked out of the basement of his house. So my office is in the basement of my house. I've worked out of my house for 20 years. I was the original, like, remote, working guy. And in my bathroom, my executive bathroom, which is about basically an indoor porta john, um, I have this picture that I keep. And this is from a game. It was Virginia or North Carolina at Virginia. The date is we go back to 1983. On November 12th, 1983, my dad made this for me. This is the top half of the program for the game, and then that picture right there. I took that
Mhm.
picture.
Right. Wow.
And the running back for Virginia, his name is Barry Word, and the guy back here who's behind the play is a great linebacker from North Carolina, Micah Moon. And you have to remember now, this is 1983. And if you're a linebacker at North Carolina, you're a big deal because Lawrence Taylor had been there just a couple years earlier. This was a top 10 game, and it was the first time I had sideline credentials. I had just turned 13 years old. And I had my camera that Santa Claus had brought me, and I was taking pictures on the sideline, and my dad was officiating in the game. And I took that picture as Barry Word dove over the pylon for what was the game-winning touchdown. What you don't see is that Micah Moon, the linebacker in the background of that picture, after he missed the tackle, hit me. And I might have weighed 90 pounds back then. And he blew me up. I mean, blew me up. As Marty says, it's like a yard sale. Everything blew out of my pockets. My camera was laying there, and it was this super, super cheap AstroTurf they had at Scott Stadium at UVA in Virginia. And and I hit my head and the whole deal, and everybody ran over, "Are you okay?" And I popped up. I thought it was the greatest thing that ever happened. But that was the day that changed my life because my dad had been an official in the ACC. I think it was his second full year. He'd worked small college games when I was growing up. I knew I didn't want to do that because I saw how people, even back then, would yell at him and scream at him. I don't want the pressure of having to make that call. I knew I wasn't a good enough athlete to play college football, but I looked around that day with my sideline credential and realized everyone there was getting paid to be there. Everyone on that sideline, whether they worked for the team or they were a photographer for a newspaper or they were a local TV reporter or they were a sports writer, the trainers, everyone there was getting paid. I'm like, all right, so how in the hell do you get paid to go to college football games? And so that day changed my life because it made it all feel accessible. And that was the goal. The goal from that day became how do I get to do one of these jobs? And so yeah, so I took that picture and and that's the day that changed my life right there. I still have the credential. I still have the negatives for the picture back here taped to the back of it. And so you see this name here, Doug Rhodes, Washington, D.C. on the back of it. Doug Rhodes was the one that got the program and helped my dad. And Doug actually had this framed. And Doug Rhodes ended up becoming the head of officiating for the ACC and then worked for us at ESPN for years. Doug passed away a few years ago. But that was the day that changed my life. That was the day I was like, all right, I got to figure out how to do one of these jobs because you guys know this. The best part, um, to me, the best part of these events is when you get to go in early. Like get kickoffs at 7:45 and you get into the stadium at 1. That's the coolest. When they're still mowing the grass or painting the lines or everybody testing out the PA system and they're rehearsing for the national anthem and then you go into the press box or you go into the locker room with my dad or whatever and you come out and there's 85,000 people there. Like it's just to me that's the best part. And so behind the yellow rope, that was the goal, and it started on that day.
I mean, I'm intrigued. I've got a direction to where this question's going, but I'm intrigued as a 13-year-old boy. Me and George, a few years ago, we were at an event in London for the opening of Tottenham Hotspur NFL Stadium, and it became a standing joke that like every single play we were like, and we're fully grown men. I'm 40 now. George is, a year or two older,
Older than
and
40.
we're fully grown men, and we're like, big lad, big lad. They're all huge, right? You're 13 years old, getting bowled over by,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
even at the college football age and
yeah.
stage of development, they're still really big dudes.
They're just giant. They're just massive. And then the cool. I see George is wearing his Ole Miss shirt. So uh, I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, the capital of North Carolina. Sir Walter Raleigh. He's from y'all's neighborhood, and when my dad, so the rule was there's a couple of rules in place for officials. They cannot officiate games of their alma mater. They cannot officiate games of their children's alma mater. So my dad could not later work Tennessee or Wake Forest games because my brother and I went there. He couldn't work East Carolina games because he went to school there, but he also could not work North Carolina State games because we lived in Raleigh, which is where NC State. So if you live in Miami, you can't work Miami games or you can't work, FIU games. If you live in Austin, you can't work Texas games. Now it didn't matter that Duke and Chapel Hill were as close to us as NC State was. We lived in Raleigh. But Dad couldn't officiate NC State games, but he would get calls all the time from North Carolina State to officiate their scrimmages. And it was reps for Dad, but it was also an opportunity for officials to explain to players, all right, this is what the rule change is going to be this year. And to talk to the coaches about, all right, this is what, this is how I probably would call this. I probably wouldn't call that. Um, Monty Kiffin was the head coach at North Carolina State for a couple of years during this same era in the early 1980s. So my brother and I would go with Dad over to Carter Finley Stadium or over to their practice field, which was on campus. And while Dad was officiating the scrimmage, my brother and I would play football with the children of the coaching staff. And at Carter, and he disputes this story, but I tell it all the time anyway. We wrote it in our book a couple of years ago, Sidelines and Bloodlines. We were at Carter Finley Stadium. Back then, they had the hill, which is just a grass hillside where the team runs out now and there's stands there. So while the team is practicing, we're up on the hill playing like Nerf football with all these coaches' kids. And there's this one little kid. and he keeps calling penalties and he's calling holding and he's calling DPIs and he was just and finally uh this guy Coach Kiffin, Monty Kiffin runs down the field, blows his whistle, and he goes, Lane, damn it, you're blowing up my practice, shut up. And it was Lane Kiffin. So fast forward to 20 however many years later, and I remember my brother calls. My brother's 3 years younger than me. He's and Lane's just a little bit younger than my brother. But my brother called me and he goes, hey, you remember that little mouthy kid from NC State? I go, yeah. And my brother goes, I think he just got the damn Raiders job. And it was the truth. Now, Lane to this day disputes that story, but his dad verified it for me. When Lane was at FAU in Boca Raton, I covered the Shula Bowl. I was in town to cover Homestead, to cover the NASCAR finale, and I drove up to the Shula Bowl, and Monty Kiffin was up in the press box. They just gave him like a empty luxury box just to hang out and watch games. He was an advisor, for the team. One of the greatest defensive coaches of all time. Invented the Tampa 2 defense, that made the Buccaneers famous. And I told Coach Kiffin that story. He's like, oh, I remember that. But Lane denies it. I'm going to see Lane next week. He'll deny it then too. But it was that was my introduction to Lane Kiffin.
I can't even remember where I was going.
You go to, you
Can't even remember where we were going with the next
do
question.
you know what? Do you know what most disappointed me, Ollie? I thought that you were going with your Tottenham Hotspur story. I think you thought you were going to tell Ryan that you and I scored the first touchdown at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But I mean, hey, never an opportunity not to talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. But no, but what
That's my favorite
saying,
football memory.
yeah, what you're saying, all is you're talking about how big these guys looked, and that's so. Again, I was on the sideline. My first sideline credentials for a game was that game at Virginia in 1983, but I had been on the sideline for practices at NC State before that. And when those guys came walking out, and these are old school shoulder pads, right? And they were wearing those big neck rolls on the back and all that stuff. Those guys, I mean, they were the biggest human beings I'd ever seen in my life. And again, I was 12, I was 10 in some cases, and was so skinny. And so the goal was I learned how to navigate a sideline at a very young age. So when I'm on the sideline now for the last few minutes of a game, and everybody's all nervous or whatever. When I was in the pits at NASCAR races, whatever, dude, I got run over by a 250 pound, linebacker when I was 13. I'm not worried about getting hit with a lug nut.
There's enough college football memories in that like last 10 minutes alone to fuel like an entire book. Write another book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you narrow down the past, 30 plus years of your college football experience to like one defining favorite college football moment? That's where I was going.
Yeah, no. It it was a crossroads game for me because my father's last game as an official was the 2009 BCS championship, and it was Sam Bradford at Oklahoma versus Tim Tebow at Florida, and Florida won the game. Um, and but the last, and we write again. We wrote a book. My dad, my brother, and I wrote a book, Sidelines and Bloodlines, a few years ago, and the book opens with this story. Was me back on the sideline for the last few minutes of that game and talking to dad during the game. And I remember Bruce Feldman was standing next to me, and I'd known Bruce was still at ESPN, and I'd known Bruce for forever. And dad and I are just talking. And I took a picture that's in the book. I took a picture of dad kind of turned. He's looking downfield, but he's talking to me. And I took it like with a BlackBerry. Um, but we're just talking. And Bruce is like, "What are you doing, dude?" I'm like, "Man, I've been doing this since I was 12." I mean, standing on the sideline talking to my dad during games, but to be on the sideline talking with dad for the last couple of minutes of his last game, which, oh, by the way, also was a national championship game. And I remember when the game ended, you guys know when the game ends, you're on the sideline, everyone runs out onto the field. And all the media members run out onto the field. The team that just won runs out onto the field, and everyone ran out onto the field. We're in the red zone on the kind of we're at the tunnel side of the stadium, Joe Robbie Stadium or Land Shark or whatever the hell we're calling it now, where the Formula One race is, and everybody ran to the right because Florida was headed to the middle of the field. Stoops and Urban were going to shake hands and all that stuff, and they're all following Tebow. I went with my dad. It's the only time I ever did this. All the games I went to the officiate, I ran with him off the field, like through the end zone, up the tunnel to the locker room. And that was the last time he was ever going to do it. And my dad and my uncle, my dad's brother were sitting, or my brother rather, and then his brother, my uncle, were sitting up in the stands, and we waved at them and ran off the field, and that was cool. And all right, so I got, since we're going through stuff, so I got all my Star Wars stuff, and I got this one stormtrooper back here that has a hat on. That's my dad's hat from his last
Wow.
game in 2009, and I have the whole uniform. That was his penalty flag that he very rarely ever threw. That was his whistle.
Wow.
His beanbag. He always had a sweatband. My dad, the whole time he officiated, he wore a sweatband and he wore like a watch over the sweatband, and he did that so that we would know that was him. Like he did that from the time I was a little kid, and then the rest of it is folded up in this
Wow.
in his container. And much to my dad's chagrin, you see the white knickers back here with the elastic bands. My dad lobbied his entire career for officials to not have to wear those knickers because they look like, Bobby Jones playing golf, at Augusta in the 20s. And the very next year, the year after Dad retired, they went to those black kind of athletic pants that you see officials wearing now. So yeah, but that's the moment because and then I had to go cover the game. Like I wrote a column that night about the game. And so for me, that was like the crossroads moment because I go back to that first game where I had credentials in '83, and then the last game that I fished that I covered with ESPN, while my dad was in the game, and wrote a column in ESPN the magazine leading up to it about this was going to be his last game, and then wrote a column that night, and it was the great Ron Cherry was the white hat in that game. Giving him the business. Y'all know Ron and but it just that was it. That night was great. And my dad, my brother was there, my uncle was there, my mother had passed away years later, but my stepmother was there that night. So that was it for me because that was the crossroads. Like we did it kind of moment. Dad's working a national championship game, and I'm there covering it.
That's awesome. Is that, I mean, our kind of final question was about the one sporting memory that will stay with you forever. Is that the one thing that you'll just remember to the very end? Is that the pinnacle of your
Yeah.
sports career?
Yeah, I think so. Just because again, it was that feeling of I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, and Dad was finishing what I believe is a college football Hall of Fame officiating career. He worked almost 2 dozen bowl games, a couple national championships, a couple Rose Bowls. He worked every New Year's Day game except for the Sugar Bowl, um, and worked most of them a couple times. And just knowing when I was a little kid, and thinking about going to Carson Newman and Catawba and Mars Hill and these small college games, or even when I was a little kid, the high school games in Eastern North Carolina, my dad would be leaving on a Friday, to go work a high school game in some town you've never heard of and will never hear of in Eastern North Carolina. And to see him go from that, while he also was so successful in his day job, to see him, get to walk off the field on his own terms after a national championship game, and me being having the goal of wanting to get paid to cover games, and I was getting paid in American dollars, boys, to be there that night. And so, yeah, to me that's the night. And then my brother was there, who's also had an amazing career. For all of us, it was a full circle moment for us as adults. And at that point, I mean, I had a daughter at home. My brother had a daughter at home. We could come home and tell him about it. We were all grown up, but we were still doing exactly what we wanted to do, when we were kids.
I had a strong feeling we would run over, and none of us are complaining on this call about listening to these stories, Ryan. We've taken up enough of your time, but I just wanted to ask you one thing before you go. You've mentioned many legendary names, and you talked about meeting some of your heroes. They always say, don't ever meet your heroes. Have those been as great an experiences as you hoped they would be when you meet the people that you admire the most in sports?
Yes, but you hold your breath because you worry, because, I'm not going to lie and say that every famous person I've ever met was awesome because they weren't. But in the realm of collegiate athletics, which is where I have spent most of my life, um, you know, everyone I've talked to, I wasn't very rarely was I let down. Usually it was the complete opposite. Like I think about when I was a student at Tennessee, and Brent Musburger is Brent Musburger, right? The voice of college football for most of my life. And I remember Florida was playing at Tennessee. Shane Matthews was a quarterback at Florida. Heath Schuler was at Tennessee. Huge game. Pouring down rain. And I remember I mentioned Link Hudson and those guys. We were sitting there eating a hot dog before the game. And Brent Musburger comes walking through the press box with Dick Vermeil. And we go, Brent. And we never met him. And he turned around and he goes, "What's up, young men?" We're like, "What do you think? It's raining. Uh, you think that'll slow Florida down?" And he goes, "Boys, if Shane Matthews can grip it, Shane Matthews can throw it." And then he sat down and talked to us for like 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, man, kickoff's coming. You got to go to work. And then I got to work with Brent later. And he was the nicest guy in the world. I worked with um, I worked with all the big names at some point or another, and they were all amazing. And that I have always been, because I started in this business in the production as a production assistant, like grunt level, entry level at ESPN, cutting highlights and answering the phones and running teleprompter. And not everyone that worked with me was great, but in college football, everyone I have worked with, all the legends have been just amazing, and that is proof that you can be a good guy and still be a good person. And still, I always say it's the Laura Rutledge rule. You can still be an amazing, like, nice person, even as your career is completely taking off and you're doing stuff that you never dreamed of. And that's when I met those people and they still were like that. That was pretty good.
Well, you're one of the good guys, and we do appreciate you taking the time out to speak to us, because we know you're a busy guy. What You mentioned this a little bit at the top of the show. What's going to keep you busy between now and football season, and what can our listeners watch out for that's coming from Ryan McGee over the summer?
Well, you are our greatest publicist, George, and Marty McGee, and we appreciate that. You're our international PR rep. But no, Marty McGee's every Saturday morning. We'll be on TV until and we're still on TV in the summer. We just do radio on TV in the summer, but we'll be in the Wilderness Lodge studios. When May shows up, it's time for Indy 500. The Miami Grand Prix, I'll do Formula One. I still do motorsports. And then we start thinking about Omaha at the end of June, where we'll see if my Tennessee Volunteers can defend their national championship. And at some point, I'm going to sleep, and maybe try to take some time off. But it'll be SEC Media Days before we know it. But yeah, Marty McGee never sleeps. So I will see everybody on Saturday morning / Saturday afternoon.
Well, just a reminder for everyone listening, you can listen to Marty McGee live on the ESPN radio via the app for free in this country, which is seldom you can listen to anything for free. I also think Ollie and you should get together to do a motorsports episode of this podcast,
Well,
because that would be
if
something I'd listen to.
I have spent this entire podcast looking at the number 43 Dynaco car, which I believe that's what I'm looking at behind you there.
You're looking at the car that inspired the Dynaco car. So
Yeah, look at that.
that's the Richard Petty. That's the Superbird, by Plymouth. And
That was going to
yeah,
be my question while I was looking at it was,
yeah,
is it the Dynaco car or is
yeah.
it the inspiration behind it? Now we
This is
know.
it. So in the Cars films, Richard Petty actually voices Mr. the King, which is funny too, because the King's still doing great. The King will be 88 this July. But his son Kyle, who also raced forever, Kyle's a great friend of mine, and Kyle said it's funny because um, when people meet his dad, uh, like little kids don't remember Richard Petty as a race car driver, but as soon as he starts talking, he says their faces change, and they're like, "Are you Mr. the King?" Who I'm Mr. King. You know what? I got a crossover deal here for you. So Sterling Marlin, two-time Daytona 500 winner and from Columbia, Tennessee. He raced this car
Look at that.
after Tennessee won the national championship. He raced this at the Bristol Motor Speedway, which you guys remember was where they played the Virginia Tech Tennessee game, the Battle of Bristol. But he ran that car in 1999 to commemorate Tennessee's national championship. So I always keep that one at hand too. No. Hey, we can do. I got more. I actually have. I have as much motorsport stuff as I do Star Wars stuff as I do college football stuff. So we can do as many different shows as you guys want to.
That's good to me. I'm down. I'm down.
Well, that's definitely all we've got time for as the recording tape comes to its end. Thanks to Ryan and Ollie for their excellent input. Thanks you all for listening and supporting us. Stay safe and well, and catch you all next time.